Welcome, everybody, to NetApp On Air. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, I'm your host, Nick Howell. We have got an action-packed show for you today. We're excited to talk about some more new things that are in ONTAP 9.16, as well as some good fundamentals that you need to know when you're operating your NetApp storage system. So first things first, make sure you get into our Discord community. If you're not in there already, there's over 5,000 people in there, guys. There's a lot of people in there that can help you with your issues. If you have any questions about anything, our engineers and support staff hang out in there, can get your questions answered. It might save you a ticket. You never know. But it's a quick way to get some answers and just hang out, share some barbecue pictures, tell us what your home lab setup looks like, all kinds of good stuff. Discord.gg/NetApp, or just go to netappdiscord.com and you can click the link there. Today we're going to continue the conversation about what I had teased in the thumbnail and in the title and everything was storage mobility, and that is a massive topic that NetApp has been at the forefront of for a few decades now. Honestly, with some of the earliest technologies that we've had, we were able to move data around pretty seamlessly and non-disruptively. We've had non-disruptive upgrades and all kinds of stuff like that for the longest time when it comes to our hardware with it and how it's ONTAP operates with it. But when we had our guest today on last fall, excuse me, we really did a deep dive on SnapMirror vault policies and things like that, and we followed that up with SnapMirror ActiveSync with Jeff Steiner right before we went into the holiday break. So lots of stuff on that. Well, one of the things we didn't get into was, well, what if you just need to migrate things? What if you just need one of your SVMs to move to a different node? What if you need to move it to a different cluster? What are the impacts of that? And how do all these new features work in the newest version of ONTAP? Well, there was a session on that at Insight this past year, in case you didn't get to attend. And I believe it was called Storage Mobility or something like that. We'll let him describe it. But I want to bring the creator and presenter of that show, of that session, onto the show right now. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Tony Ansley. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Did I set that up right? What was the name of that session from Insight?
Yeah, so it was called Maximizing Data Availability and Performance with SVM Data Mobility.
There you go. So if you guys want to go over to media.netapp.com, look up, I think those sessions are over there. You can find the original session. I believe it's up there, Tony. Don't quote me on that, guys.
I believe that one is up there. It was recorded from what I
understand. It'll just be slides and audio, but I mean, at least you can you can watch the presentation on demand over there. We're still working on trying to get some of that stuff on YouTube as well. So just in the meantime, we're going to have the presenter on the show here come in and guide us through it in our own way. So the way that I was setting that up, Tony, first of all, welcome back. And we've gotten rave reviews about the SnapMirror stuff. There's a lot of like fundamental 101 ONTAP stuff that revolve around SnapMirror that I think is super valuable to people. So thank you for that episode a few months ago. That was a really, really good one. I feel like we could have done even more on that topic. But I really want to hone in on what you guys covered in the in that Insight session. Really about the new stuff that's in 9.16 around SVM Migrate as a feature and function. So how did we get there? How do we get to the point where we would need to move an SVM around?
Well, if we look at the history, right? I mean, we've always, as you said, we've always had the ability to move data around very easily, and a lot of our, especially cluster to cluster or site to site migrate or movement of data was really focused on disaster recovery. So like we talked about in the last session, SnapMirror was the engine to do that. But what if you need to, what if I've got a series of clusters that, for example, that one is overloaded and is being overutilized, and I've got some free space or free performance and capacity on another cluster. And I just want to do some more, I want to be able to more efficiently and better utilize my existing resources, right? I would like to move an SVM, for example, from one cluster to another to allow us to balance those out. Or I'm doing a technology refresh, or, I mean, these are a lot of interesting use cases. One of the interesting use cases that I also presented in this session was, what about not disaster recovery, but what about disaster avoidance?
Okay.
Think about North Carolina here in the States, right? We had a massive storm with floods. If there was a data center in Western Carolina and I wanted to prepare, I could move my SVMs out of that data center to another data center, maybe on the East Coast or maybe in Tennessee or something, where I could avoid any situation where I could have had that data center go down and affect the access to my data. So that's what we thought about when we came up with this idea of SVM Migrate. And we introduced this in 9.10, in the 9.10.1 release, and it really was very limited. It focused on protecting SVMs that were doing NFS v3. And so when we think about an SVM, the SVM is really, especially for NAS, it's the NAS server, and we can move those things virtual. We can move them wherever we want. And in the past, before 9.10, the only way we had the ability to do that was using SnapMirror, and that's a disruptive technology. And so how do we do this in a non-disruptive way? That's where we came up with SVM Migrate, or SVM Data Mobility, which we call SVM Migrate in our text. But unfortunately, on the CLI, it's called vServer Migrate, from the old school terminology. But yeah, that's what we came up with.
So this isn't just to set the stage here, this isn't the only way to move data around. We obviously talked about the SnapMirror stuff a few months ago with you. We've got other tools and features like volmove, agar relocate, and things like that we'll get into in other episodes of the show. Unless you wanted to talk about anything of them in particular as it relates to this kind of stuff. But there's so many different ways, guys, to move data around. That's one of the big, and to do so non-disruptively, whether you're doing any sort of disaster avoidance or recovery, or if you're just expanding or condensing and consolidating, the ability, think of an SVM as a VM. It literally stands for storage VM, storage virtual machine. It's the front end access layer. It's where you're going to have all of your junction paths, your IP addresses that are connected to lifts, that are connected to physical interfaces. Like all of that stuff under the covers is the webbing, the spider webs that pulls all this stuff together. So the fact that it is just a piece of software that can move around to a different physical device, just like your VMs in VMware at the end of the day. So you can have a cluster of 10 nodes of data of ONTAP, and it can just move in. That SVM can move to any of those for performance reasons, for load balancing reasons, for you want to take a cluster or an HA pair offline, you want to do a head swap, you want to do any of those reasons, just move it, and it'll take the data with it. So at the end of the day, that's one of the questions I had, Tony, that we need to get into a little bit was, I don't want to get too mired down in the execution of what one looks like, but I want people to understand what's involved with SVM Migrate. If they, for any of those reasons that either of us just rattled off, any of those use cases, when I go to do an SVM Migrate, what do I need to be evaluating? What are the kind of unknown unknowns that I need to be aware of before I really go down this path?
Sure. So,
because it's not as simple as a right-click move to this node kind of thing.
No, and in fact, it is not even you cannot perform an SVM Migrate as part of System Manager or any of the GUI interfaces. It is either a command line tool. It is a command line tool that's also accessible through the REST APIs. So, and in fact, with the REST APIs, we get a little bit more granular control of the SVM Migrate process that it's very hard to do in a command line interface.
Yeah.
So, for example, and there's a lot of things that at the end of the day, the two clusters, because we're moving an SVM, if you're moving an SVM from one cluster to another, one site to another, the data lifts are still the same. You're going to have the same IP addresses at the new destination, the same, your volumes are going to have the same access control. So in a networking perspective, the destination has to be have access to the same subnets so that those lifts can be attached to those properly. There has to be there is some control, and there has to be obviously some data lifts or some physical ports that are accessing those networks so that we can assign those lifts to the right ports. We have to identify which ports. So if you have 10, 12 ports on your cluster, which are the right ones that we need to connect. SVM Migrate can figure all that out in a very easy fashion, in a very well-defined fashion. The good thing about SVM Migrate is that moving that data, the actual data in those volumes, takes some time. So you're gonna need the right capacity. If you're something as simple as, if I have an encrypted volume, I need to make sure I have an equivalent aggregate and settings on the destination cluster, so that I can make sure my encryption stays and gets re-encrypted properly, so that we don't end up with clear text volumes for protected data. So that's very important as well. So we will migrate encrypted volumes, but we do it on a like-to-like basis. So if it's volume encryption, we're going to replicate to we're going to encrypt the volume. If it's an aggregate level or array, cross array encryption, we're going to make sure that we have an array encryption aggregate configured properly, so that we can add that volume to it, which will then
with enough capacity that
with enough capacity
satisfy the underlying volumes. Yeah.
So those are some of the high level stuff. Other than that, it is almost a click. It can be as simple as one command line, walk away, and when we'll let you know when we're done. And the good thing is, like I said, if you've got a lot of data, let's say I've got petabytes or terabytes, petabytes of data in my SVM, it's going to take some time to move that data across the wire, right? So we really are just, when you kick this off, we're going to replicate that data. You're still having access. So the original source SVM continues to operate while we're doing this. We're doing this behind the scenes, right? We're using SnapMirror behind the scenes that we talked about in the last episode, my last visit, to do that replication, right? And so that's a very tried and true technology, very secure, very efficient, and we move that data as quickly as we can. Once all of that data is moved, we will then perform a simple cutover. As a matter of fact, if we throw up the slide that I have available, we can walk through that. So what do we do, right? You enter this command, and we'll talk about the command. I mean, it's simply vserver migrate. Where's my destination cluster? And what is a SVM do I want to move? That's it. That's at minimum, that's all I need. And we will go in through a set of pre-checks to make sure that there aren't any incompatibilities, like the encryption thing, right?
Well, let's talk about those pre-checks. You went over the encryption one, and obviously, with any kind of SnapMirror relationship, you got to have, I'm assuming, ONTAP version parity.
Yes,
has to exist, and you have to at least have the same amount of capacity or more. What else is in those pre-checks?
Right, so we're checking. Right, so there's a couple of things. There's several things we're checking. First off, are there any technologies or features turned on, or services, things that might not be migratable? Okay. And so there's some additional services. We're looking to see if any of the source volumes are not flex vols. We only support flex volumes today. So if there are flex groups, if there are any flex groups, we're not going to be able to support those. If there's any S3 buckets hosted on that SVM, we're not going to be able to migrate those. So that will prevent us from migrating. We will. What's nice is you can run. There's a version of the command that just lets you do the pre-check, so that you can go in and actually just run the checks, and then tell me what I need to fix to allow me to move, right?
That's fantastic. Is it just a dash pre-check or something like that? What's the variable?
It is dash, I will tell you. It is dash check dash only.
Huh. I love that. That kind of stuff is awesome.
Yeah, and that performs all the pre-checks. So to your original question, yes, encryption, flex vols versus flex groups, S3 buckets. Is there enough, on the source side? Is there any, we want to understand what SnapMirror relationships are involved, because we want to migrate those as well. We don't want to affect your protection, your ongoing protection.
Okay, so you can migrate an SVM with an existing SnapMirror relationship initialized, and it will maintain that relationship?
Yes, we will automatically manage that for you. We want to make sure, as you said, we want to make sure there's NICs available. physical ports that are
But
attached
I'm here.
and communicating.
Oh, you mean network interfaces? Okay.
Network interfaces. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah. We want to make sure that there's the right aggregates on the destination of the right type to allow us to, and enough capacity to allow us.
What do you mean
to
by
move.
that? The right type?
So remember that one of the things is, for example, encryption.
Yeah.
If I'm using array encryption and not volume encryption, I need an aggregate that is configured with array encryption. So that when I land those volume, I'm going to, if I have an array encryption drive or on an aggregate that's array encrypted here, the only way I can protect that data is to move it to the same thing on the other side. And if it doesn't exist, I can't migrate.
Now, does it remain encrypted in flight when you're moving it
Absolutely.
from A to B? Okay.
Yes.
That was one point of clarity I just wanted to throw out.
And we re-encrypt it. So there are new keys. So we're going to have to re-encrypt it with a different key on the destination cluster. So we are decrypting. We TLS encrypt it on the path over. We will re-encrypt it on the drive based using the new key on the destination side.
Gotcha.
Right? So it's those types of things that we're just kind of making sure beforehand that we're not going to. Oh, the other thing is, are there any SAN volumes? We don't support SAN today with SVM Migrate. So are there any LUNs, volumes with LUNs on? Are there IP, iSCSI or Fiber Channel or FCOE or NVMe lifts in data lifts? Those can't be migrated as well. So,
well, since you're bringing those up, OG did throw a question in the chat. How do we handle open CIF sessions and things like locked files and whatnot? Is this a SnapMirror engine knows what to do with these under the covers?
Well, CIFS unfortunately is not a non-disruptive protocol by design.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. That has to be handled on the client OS side for that to happen.
And like Active Directory settings and things like that that are built into the SVM, does that all translate over, or does that have to be reconfigured?
No, because I mean we literally are using the same identity. We have, so all of the name services that you're any kind of directory service you're using will be able to find the same IP, the same physical server, right? And all of the things that make that SVM a NAS server are still there, and will be the directory services will find them without any problem post migration.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just make sure you got your lifts, make sure you've got the same kind of physical interfaces available.
Yeah.
Make sure you have ONTAP parity.
Mm-hmm.
If you're encrypting stuff, make sure the destination also has the version of ONTAP with volume encryption.
Right.
Or if you're doing encrypted disks, if you're doing encrypted disks, you probably know what you're doing already with that kind of stuff. To be fair. So yeah, it sounds pretty straightforward, man. I'm wondering, what are the unknown unknowns? What are some blind spots here that could catch people off guard if they're not paying attention? To me, it seems like migrating a virtual machine like I would in VMware. I got to make sure it's attached to the same networks and storage, and gets it.
Yeah, I need to make sure in VMworld you have to have the same vNICs or vSwitches configurations and all of those things, right? So
yeah.
The only, the things you just kind of have to think about when you're doing a migration, right, is there are ongoing things. There's ongoing SnapMirror relationships that may still be using those same intercluster lifts. So you may not want, so this migrate may impact that, right? But you can also you can throttle this. So you can make this only use a ceiling of available bandwidth on your intercluster connection, so that you're not necessarily impacting other SnapMirror or data protection services while you're in the process of migrating. So that's another thing that you can do.
You would almost kind of want to throttle this as a background process in a way to not affect like day-to-day performance while this large data migration is happening.
Yeah, you probably will want to, and it really is going to depend on the size of the pipes and the utilization, how much free space you have on the pipes already prior to the migration. But yeah, you probably are going to want to do a throttle. You can throttle anywhere from using 100% of the available bandwidth all the way down to 4 kilobytes, 4 kilobits per second, or kilobytes per second, right? So It's pretty flexible. By default, we will use the entire pipe. So if you just enter the command, we're going to use all the resources we can to get the data moved as quickly as we can, so that we're migrating the service as quickly as we can.
I have to ask. I knew that the EMEA contingent would show up and start asking about it. Metro cluster support for SVM Migrate, is it there?
As of 9.16.1, which released in GA a couple of weeks ago, we now support Metro Cluster. So I know my EMEA guys have been all my EMEA customers, a lot of APAC customers are very interested in this, because that is really the majority of our Metro Cluster use. We will support moving an SVM from a standalone cluster into a Metro Cluster. IP.
Ooh, as a migration, as an upgrade or a
right. So,
tactic.
And that's probably one of the number one uses for this tool, right? Is technology updates. If there might be features in, or my arrays may be so old, I can't plug my new arrays into the same cluster and do vol moves. I have to actually migrate from cluster to cluster, or Metro Cluster. Right. I've got a standalone HA pair, and I want to now protect all the data in that SVM. I can migrate now with both ends need to be on 9.16.1, but I can move my SVM into a Metro cluster as a sync source aggregate onto a sync source, and then we let Metro cluster handle the replication to the sync destination side of the Metro cluster.
Yeah, everything that you just said, it's not even Metro cluster specific. I mean, just as a transition tool to move from an aging system that you might be refreshing onto a new system, like this makes things so much simpler. For example, I've got a C250 back here. If I wanted to get one of the shiny new, I don't know, C60s or the new A9, if I got a new A90 because we decided to ball out and we just spare no expense and we were gonna get the biggest, baddest performing thing we could get, I could literally do an SVM migrate from the C250 to that without even having to bother to join it to the cluster or do all of that stuff, and I could sort of migrate off and age out the other machine. Like this kind of tool is incredible for these kinds of things. So it's not just about being able to migrate from a non-MCC up to a Metro cluster system. This
as long as you can run 9.10
transition tool for everything.
Yeah, as long as you can get your source cluster to 9.10.1, you can use this tool. We do have, so there is a limitation. There is one other, as you said, the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
Just like our SVMDR solution, we have a limit on the distance between versions that we can migrate to. So if
ONTAP versions?
ONTAP versions.
Okay.
Right. So I can only migrate between an ONTAP version and a newer ONTAP version of up to two major releases. So 9.10, I can go to 9.12.1. 9.12.1, I can go to 9.14.1, and so forth. Right. So
is there a specific reason for that you're aware of, or
it's not the data movement? It's the It's the SVM configuration information.
Gotcha.
There, as ONTAP versions get newer, there are always new features that happen, right? That are introduced, and old clusters and new clusters, that when the information that we can't go backwards, right? We can't migrate from a 9.14 to a 9.12, for example, because that 9.12 may not even understand some of the configuration information that's being sent to it. It's just going to go, I don't know what to do, right? So we have that limitation today. Our goal, we would love for this to be infinite. It's just a little bit unrealistic as we add new features. So it might be volume, the maximum volume size. It could be encryption support on different versions, right? Whatever it happens to be, there are always going to be different capabilities between different ONTAP versions that may be incompatible, or even not. We may end of life something, and we may not even have support for it in a future version, right? Think about moving a DP volume, which we don't support anymore, from 9.10, and I try to migrate a DP volume to a cluster that doesn't know anything about DP, the old data protection format. it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. So it's those types of things that we have to worry about.
So I see here in setup, you've got setup SnapMirror relationship. So for SVM Migrate, is it going to sort of automatically initialize any relationships that it needs, create and initialize any relationships it needs to move the data that's directly associated with the SVM you're migrating?
Exactly. So SVM Migrate is an orchestrator for the most part, and it uses the same technology underneath that we use for SnapMirror asynchronous, or SVMDR, really, because we're migrating not only the data volumes, but the configuration of the SVM itself, just like we would with SVMDR, but also SnapMirror synchronous. So there is a phase, and we'll talk, where we go into a synchronous mode so that as we're transitioning from the old site to the new, we can better control the I/O coming in from the client. We can quiesce and flush the queues properly, so that when the next I/O we release the I/O to the client, then there aren't any in-flight packets or blocks that we didn't get taken care of. Right.
That's
so we
fantastic.
have to go into that synchronous mode. So we're orchestrating all of that behind the scenes. So as we go through setup, we're setting up those asynchronous SnapMirror relationships for each of the volumes, the flex vols that are in the source. And that's what we're allowing to do, that SnapMirror 8 transfer mode, where SnapMirror behind the scenes, just like if I were doing SVM or doing a DR scenario, we're just taking basically a baseline and then doing hourly snapshots, right? And we'll do that as long as we need to. And we'll talk about in a minute how we can control the workflow a little bit, and why those snapshots become, that SnapMirror asynchronous continuous replication comes into play. And so once we know we've got all the data over on the destination, we've gotten several successful snapshots, incremental snapshots that we've done, so we know we're capturing everything. We then will lock down that, we'll go into this pre-commit phase where we'll lock down the source SVM and the destination SVM. So we can't make any changes to the configuration. In transfer mode, we could there's some things we could change, like I might be able to turn on this feature or turn off that feature in the source SVM, and we will capture that as part of the replication. But at some point, we have to lock those SVMs down. We can't change the configuration at any point anymore. We'll then quiesce all the data transfers. We'll stop all the SnapMirror relationship data. We'll do that final transition, and then we'll switch over to sync mode. Right. Okay. Now the client is sending I/O for I/O. We're sending back all the way across every I/O. So we're in a just like SnapMirror synchronous.
This is all happening as part of the workflow without any input from the user.
You're going off and having lunch.
Yeah. Okay.
Or having a nice a good night's rest or whatever.
Or maybe go on vacation, because if you're moving any kind of data, it's going to take a couple of weeks.
It could be, absolutely.
If you're moving petabytes, you can go take 2 weeks, because it might be done when you get back.
Yeah, exactly. So once we're in sync mode, we can then go into cutover. And now what that means is we will shut off, we will block, we will tell the clients that are accessing the volume that we're not going to respond. And basically the client's going to have typically most clients have about 100 to 120 second, timeout frame, where they will, if you exceed that, then they'll flag an error to the application saying, I have an IO error, right? But in most Linux versions, Windows, so forth, that's controllable, and we will make this. To be honest with you, this cutover, I've very rarely ever seen it take more than a few seconds to do the cutover. A lot of it has to do with network routing table updates more than anything, because to activate the SVM is minuscule, maybe a second or two, but it's how do I propagate those IP addresses, because through the routing tables, to make sure that everybody can see the new location for the same IP address. Right.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to go over a little bit, we were talking about it kind of before the show, and you were talking about before, one of the things you need to make sure of is that you have your subnets, your broadcast domains, the lifts, all of that stuff need to be staged in advance to make sure that, I guess the lifts don't. The lifts will come over with it.
Yes.
But all of the subnets that they're going to land in that they exist in currently need to also exist on the destination. Is that a fair
There needs
statement?
to be ports that are available, right?
Correct.
There needs to be ports that are available on those subnets.
And then like your typical kind of broadcast domains and things like that you need to have lined up to make sure that everything's the same as it was over there.
Right.
In the event that they don't do that, what happens? Does the pre-check fail, or does it allow it to get started and then it gets to a certain point and it goes, I can't find any of my interfaces?
So one of the things it'll do is actually so if I've got 10, let's say I've got five ports on my destination cluster, 6 ports on my destination cluster. Which ones are attached? How do I know which ones are attached to my subnets? Right. So we will actually instruct the destination cluster. Once we create the SVM, we will actually go out those ports and ping the source cluster data lift. And if we can find it, we know we've got a port. We will flag those ports as connected to the same networks as my source cluster. Those are my candidate ports for where my data list will be assigned.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So that's one of the cool things that we do is we do automatic lift placement. We do automatic aggregate placement. And we do that based on like for like function, feature function. When we over here on the left where we're creating these SVMs and destination volumes and lifts, that's what we're doing. We're pinging the cluster. We're trying to communicate back from the destination to the production or to the source so that we can identify what things are there. We're looking at the data at the aggregate types. The volumes are on these types of aggregates. Their volumes are this amount of size. They have this type of auto grow, auto expand. Those types of settings. We will look at on the destination side and look for similar aggregates for those features, encryption, so forth and so on. And then look at the amount of capacity that's available, and we'll start laying those. And then we'll start laying those out. We will also try to balance if there's multiple aggregates. We'll try to balance those out so that we're not putting all the volumes on one aggregate, right? Even if we could, it may not necessarily. If there's only one aggregate, then we don't have a choice. But we'll look at how we can balance those. Now, there are again some options to allow you to control all of this function. I can, especially if I'm using the REST APIs. So if I could script this using REST APIs, and I could identify and manually place each data lift on a specific physical port if I wanted to. I can define that in the REST API. I can take a volume and put it on a very specific aggregate. Now, you better make sure that the aggregate can host the volume. Otherwise, you will get an error as part of the pre-check, right?
Yeah.
But we have control over those capabilities. In fact, we also have control over 2 really interesting points. If I just run the command and it'll run from one end to the other automatically. As each phase finishes, it'll move on to the next phase. Now, what happens if I don't necessarily want to cut over at, let's say my cutover time period comes in at 3 p.m. on payday, and my HR system is using these volumes. Do I want it to cut over in the middle of the business day? Maybe not. So what we can do is we can actually pause once we have the baseline, all the data there. We can say, you know what, I want to pause before we do the cutover. That way I can schedule it, or I can go and manually start the cutover at 3 a.m. instead of 3 p.m. Right? So at a low utilization time. The other thing we do is, and so that's one of the control flows. The other is when we finish the cutover and the new SVM is running, we will automatically delete the old SVM, the volumes, all of the things that were on the source cluster automatically. We can pause that too. We can say, you know what? I don't want to do automatic cleanup. I may want to keep that SVM around for whatever reason. Maybe I'm paranoid. I just want to make sure that everything worked before I delete the actual data. I may want to run some tests, so I can do that as well. So there's a lot of functionality, a lot of flexibility in the workflow that you can do with this tool. So You can do it from end to end, start to finish, or you can actually take breaks and pause it at certain points to allow you to make yourself feel comfortable or allow you to control when and how things get moved and cut over.
Yeah, I'm one of those super paranoid storage engineers.
Most
that,
people are.
I'm going to want to do a lot of diff checks to make sure that file versions and we have parity across the different data sets, and that we didn't miss anything, and do I still have all my snapshots, and like all that stuff when doing when a big data migration like this. So for me, like, the migration itself might happen relatively quickly. My peace of mind might take 2 weeks, might take a month to go through all of the things and make sure all of the spreadsheets and the home drives and all of the things that are there are where they're supposed to be before I'm like, yeah, all right. And then, even then, I would probably go turn the SVM off before deleting it and kind of just, is anybody complaining?
Right, and we turn that
the ultimate litmus test, right?
And we will stop that SVM because we have to. We can't have that source SVM running because the IP addresses are the same.
That's good to know. Okay, I didn't realize that.
It will go into a standby mode or a down mode, right? Yeah. Where we bring up the mode on the new destination side. And when you're doing this, right, to your point, I can pause it once I'm at steady state, right? I'm doing regular snap mirror asynchronous replication as long as I'm in that pause phase, right? So I'm still continuously updating the destination so that when I am ready to fail over and I say go, it flips into I'm there. It does that last snapshot sync. It flips into synchronous mode. It then does the cutover and does everything it needs to do and starts the destination SVM, enabling those client protocols, making sure all the peering for DR relationships happens. Turn all those things on. Make sure those snap mirror relationships are now running so that we're continuing to protect the volumes that were protected on the original source. We're going to protect them in exactly the same way with the exact same volumes on the destination side, on their old DR site, right? So there may be a third cluster out there that they're replicating to for DR. And so we want to make sure that all of those take place.
Right, but if you're replicating to a secondary site, it's still going to continue to replicate to that secondary site from the new location of the
exactly.
SVM.
Yeah, it will look, the snap mirror relationship will look basically the same as it did on the source. We're replicating the same volumes with the same settings to the same destination.
So I'm over here in my SSH session looking at the commands because I haven't looked at vServer Migrate and the options available and stuff like that. So it's pretty simple. When you just do vServer Migrate tab or question mark, you can see what 5 or 6 options are in there to do that stuff. One of them that triggered a thought, and there's vServer Migrate show, and I thought, how the hell do you track the progress of one of these massive kind of migrations? Because it's not in System Manager. We don't have an output or a display that we can give people of like what step in this process on your slide here that it's currently in. So how do we keep track? How do we notify a user or an administrator what step is finished and what step it's currently on?
Well, at this point, the way you do that is just like you said. You can constantly run a vServer show or a
vServer Migrate show.
vServer Migrate show, and you can pull there's one of the fields there is basically what stage that it's in, and it's just a polling. You're going to have to do that on your own. Once if you're running it in a shell, let's say you're just running it in a shell and you're not, it will actually send a message back to the console.
Oh,
so that,
okay.
So it'll say this phase is complete, I think. But for the most part, if you want to know on a real-time basis, you're just going to have to check it on a manual command line.
I have a feature request to put in now.
Yeah. No, it would, and it's very hard, right? It's really very hard to do. You don't necessarily want to always give up the shell or lock the shell down if you're using it. Yeah, you can start another one, but we tend not to want, to run in background if we can. And that's what we do.
Yeah, but to the point, though, is like there's nothing here that the peace of mind that all of you watching this should have is that none of this stuff that's on Tony's slide here is new. None of this is new. As he said at the very beginning, this is an orchestration exercise of things that already exist within ONTAP. Tony, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong there. Is there anything net new in ONTAP that is enabling this, or did we just wrap it all up in a nice bow called vServer Migrate, and it's kind of just executing things that people have always done?
Yeah, well, I will admit that there are some things we do that aren't necessarily API driven, that we actually are coding directly with, because we know what's going on underneath. But and usually that's just to be more efficient, to make sure that we can do this faster. We can do some of our own checks, additional checks, to make sure that each step is happening the way we want it to happen in terms of the migration process, as opposed to what an API might send back, which would be a much more generic message. So it just gives us better control over a lot of the same technologies that we're using. To be honest with you, this is all SnapMirror asynchronous. It's configuration replication service and SnapMirror synchronous. And then core ONTAP, create SVM, delete SVM, assign volume. Yeah, it's all basic API stuff.
OG had another good question that I was trying to find an option for. Can you control the volume placement on the destination cluster?
You can with the REST API. You cannot with the CLI. So with the CLI, I can provide SVM Migrate a list of candidate aggregates. So if you want to get everything on one aggregate, yes, you can. You can just say, here's my aggregate list is this aggregate. But we will still automatically place the volumes and manage the allocation of space and all of the things that we do, right? But yes, that's really the only way in the CLI to control is to do, and all the volumes in that SVM will have to go to that one aggregate, right? So you need to make sure it can host it. If you're in a multiple aggregate environment, we will place them wherever we need to follow the rules that we're in terms of capability, capacity, aggregate balance, utilization balancing, those types of things, right? What's the, am I in a is this volume a high performance volume, or is it a low performance volume? Do I want to put a high performance volume on a low performance aggregate? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Those types of things, right? So,
I mean, if it's AFF to AFF, you're going to be using TLC anyway.
Yeah.
If you're going, A series to C series, you're just going to have a difference. But I mean, they're all going to be NVMe drives at this point if they're modern systems.
Yeah.
So,
but if I have multiple aggregates,
absolutely,
and I want to do granular volume placement, use the REST API. I can literally map each volume to a specific aggregate. And if I was going to see if I had an example I might be able to throw up on the screen here.
Good question, OG.
Yeah, let me see if I can present this to you.
It also brings up it makes me want to ask you a question back. Like, if you're using ADP, this is less of a concern. I mean, unless you're doing some custom configuration. Like, how are you doing whole disks? Are you building your own aggregates customized? That makes me ask 3 more questions when you ask that question. So I guess I'm curious at the end of the day, is there a guidance? Is there a best practice? Or is this just going to be left up to everybody's decision process of how they're configuring things under the covers? New slide.
Yes, new slide. Throw that up there. So I kind of color coded this so you can actually see the records, but network interface mapping. So mapping a lift to a specific port on a specific node. I can do that with the REST API. Cannot do that on CLI. I can also do the aggregate to OG's question, right? I can map an aggregate for a specific volume.
So I do see Agger list as a option
on the CLI.
on the CLI. I can specify the aggregate, but I don't see a place to specify the volume.
Right. And I can specify multiple aggregates, right? So I can say my agger list is agger 1, agger 2, agger 3.
Right.
But we still
just like you can with any SVM, right?
Right. But we will still control, just like an SVM, we will, when you create volumes, we will control where those volumes go.
Yeah.
And we will use a set of rules to allow us to do that.
With all of this groundwork laid, it's kind of I don't know anything special, but I just went through setting up some pretty good flex groups. All of this kind of makes sense that this is going to work for flex groups in the future, which would solve OG's problem. If you're, as long as you put in your constituent aggregates in the SVM and you're going to move a flex group over, as long as there's the same stuff, like I can see a world where that's a reality, but not there yet. I don't know roadmap or anything for this. So don't take my word for it. I'm just, an admin talking out loud.
Yeah. But like we added Metro Cluster, right? We're always looking for where's the squeaky wheel? What is the next feature that our customers are saying, you know what, this is a great tool, but I can't use it because of X or Y. If you just implement this feature or that feature, right? And I'll tell you, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? The more customers that ask their reps to tell us what, we need to be implementing, that directly impacts our roadmap.
It does.
So
we have advisory boards, we have advocacy groups, we have all kinds of stuff, and they can sometimes be the loudest ones in the rooms, and our biggest customers, of course.
Exactly.
We always want to take care of everybody. So I love that you showed this. This is fantastic. So is there maybe you can give me the link after the show, and is there a full REST API documentation reference for SVM Migrate somewhere that we can?
Yes, it's available on the docs website, the support website. And I can definitely send that to you. And
we can deal with that after the show. I'll put it in the description for you. Yeah, we'll throw it in Discord for everybody, and for anybody watching this afterwards, it'll be down in the description for you. Okay, cool. So I think at the end of the day, I think we got done today what I was really hoping to do. And there has been some scuttlebutt that I've observed recently that we are not able to move data as well or as easily as some of these newer, shiny startups that are out there. And I just want to say for the record that we've been doing it. We've been done doing it for 20 plus years now.
By the way, nobody's doing it that long. Right. Nobody's doing this.
No. Nobody has this level of cluster architecture.
Right.
First of all, to even need to facilitate something like this. But the ability to move from one entire cluster to another non-disruptively, all orchestrated automatically for you behind the scenes without third-party tools, I challenge anybody to go find me another manufacturer that can do that. Because you can't, because they don't, because we know, because we test them all. So at the end of the day, the FUD is frustrating. It's a tactic that's used, but I wanted to jump on this topic. One, because it was really relevant and timely. Two, I wanted an excuse to get Tony back on the show because we didn't have enough time to talk about more stuff last time. And the insight session, I found out we're already going into insight planning for this year, guys. Looking back, we always look back as a retrospective. This was your session, Tony, was one of the top-rated, most highly attended sessions at Insight last year.
Thank you. Yeah, I was surprised. They actually had to add a second session, and that was really validated the value of this product, right? So.
Yeah, and what it does for me though, in a very indirect way, is it shines a massive spotlight on all the cool things that we've been doing for 20 plus years. That all it took was a little fancy wrapper of an orchestrator to put on top of it. Guys, we've been doing this shit for decades. We've been doing SnapMirror and vault policy and backups and DR and mobility and moving things around and all that stuff till the cows come home non-disruptively without screwing anything up for decades. And just, the simple fact that we put something in it called SVM Migrate as a feature, which is a nice orchestrate. It's a fancy script. It's a fancy orchestration script. At the end of the day, it's more than that, I promise. But it's not doing anything net new that you couldn't already do as a one-off, is the point I'm trying to get at. And
I will
you
tell
would
you,
be hard-pressed to find anybody else out there that could do all of those things, much less orchestrate the whole thing non-disruptively.
Yep. And think about SVM, really the vision with this tool. I mean, just think about, again, no roadmap here, right? But just if you think about 2, 3, 5, 10 years, the idea of data where you need it, when you need it there, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of edge to data center to cloud and back, cloud, the cloud to cloud, eventually we'll get there. Now, some of the cloud technologies are not necessarily there to support synchronous replication.
No.
But you know what? We work with those guys all the time. But think about that ability to be able to move data from, where I need it, when I need it to be there. Disaster avoidance is a big one.
Yeah. Just to be clear, Thomas wanted to stress, he just wants to be perfectly clear. Source or destination can be my Metro Cluster 916.1, but not both. I'm not sure of what.
No, source and destination both have to be. Well, I take that. Well, yes, unfortunately, source and destination, because it's a new feature. There's new functionality.
Yeah. There's
Metro
no
Cluster
two
does some
versions
weird
behind.
Things, right? Yeah, Metro Cluster has some weird configurations behind the scenes on an SVM that we have to change. We have to. The code in 916.1 understands that, and so any other you need to be 916.1 on both the source and destination.
Now, and when we get to 9.18.1, you'll still be able to move a 916 SVM to 918.
That's correct.
But because it's brand stinking new in 916, both ends have to be on 916. It's for this one time.
We have to take a little pain at the beginning to realize the value in the future, right?
Yeah.
So that is the pain. And again, as a lot of customers are moving off their Metro Cluster fiber channel to IP, there's a lot of Metro Cluster to Metro Cluster migration that's needing to happen as well. So we support that as well. So.
I've had the GA release running for 2 weeks now, serving data. It's nearly 100 terabyte data set. No problems. Upgrade was flawless from 912. I went from 912 straight to 916. Okay, it just didn't even hiccup. Nothing broke, nothing. So the upgrades are getting better. System Manager looks way better. If anything, if there's any reason to upgrade, if you're a System Manager user, upgrade for System Manager. It looks a lot better. They continue to clean that up and evolve it every single version. Final thoughts, Tony. What things did we talk about? What are some things that people should keep in mind? Again, some of those unknown unknowns, little nuggets of information that people should remind people of if they're thinking about doing this.
Well, I think we covered most of it. I mean, at the end of the day, right? What I hope is if you're running NAS workloads today, this basic what ONTAP's been running, forever. This is one of those things that should be on the top of your list, right? As to one of the tools that I should at least go and figure out is this a situation where I can use this tool? Because, by the way, it's going to be the easiest way that you're going to have to migrate an SVM and migrate data from especially one cluster to another, one site to another. If you're changing data centers, whatever it happens to be. So, definitely put this at the top of your, the top arrow in your quiver when you're thinking about doing data management or data movement. You can always fall back on SnapMirror. It will be disruptive, but it's there. It's there to backstop you in case this is not the tool. For whatever reason, I'm doing. I have a LUN in my SVM, or I have. It might be that I have a SnapMirror cloud relationship or something, and I'm just throwing it. I don't have the full list of what's working and what's supported and what's not here.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, SnapMirror Cloud may even be supported. But those types of things. So just make sure that, just kind of keep this at the top of your list, because I think it's going to solve your problem the quickest if the conditions are right.
Yeah.
And it's always, always fall back on the other services that we have that are tried and true, just aren't they're just they're just disruptive instead of non-disruptive. But
and don't sleep on this as a transition tool. Like I said towards the beginning of the show, like what I see here is it doesn't have to be Metro Cluster. Like it can be a transition tool from one HA pair to another. If you're a smaller shop or you've got an edge location that you're just doing a hardware refresh swap into, plug the second one in, SVM Migrate, it moves all the data with it, with your SVM configuration, and it brings all of your network kind of configuration over with it. Non-disruptively, and you do the cutover, and you just pull the other one back and send it back in for your trade-in. This feels like a really awesome transition tool that's native, built in. You don't have to buy any third-party software. It seems really powerful, and I can't wait to test it out.
Yeah, and by the way, standalone HA clusters, that's where we started. I mean, that's what we were doing. I mean, it's only this new version where we start to think about Metro Cluster. But so we've been doing it for the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
9-10.
So, 9-10. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Tony, as always, man, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for the wealth of information. Another new feature I've got that I'm excited to go tinker with and play with in 9.16. I'm going to go find out. I have a whole bunch of feature requests I'm going to go put in now to both the system manager and the ONTAP team. So it has my gears are turning in ways that we can absolutely take advantage of this and other means. But thanks again for being on the show. Second time. You're now a 2-timer. So we have a small handful of those. You're in the special club now.
Well, I appreciate the time. This is one of I think one of the coolest features we've got, and I love talking about it. It's why I did the insight session. So
yeah,
thank you.
Please do it again this year.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
I think that we're gonna have some updates by then probably, but by the time we get to October. By the way, guys, Insight's been announced. We did it last at Insight. It's October 13th, I believe. October 13th or 15th, maybe 13th through the 15th. It's in the middle of October this year, so moving back to October timeframe. So keep that in mind when you're doing your planning for the year. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll get out of here. Thank you very much for the time today. Thank you for joining us for this episode. This was awesome. I'm in one of those I'm almost stunned for words in a way because there's so many things going through my head of use cases for ways that people could take advantage of this. This is not just like a disaster recovery kind of tool. You could use this as a migration and upgrade tool. All of that stuff to just seamlessly, non-disruptively move your data around. Fan-freaking-tastic tool. New addition to 9.16. So do it for our good buddy Keith Asen. Go upgrade your ONTAP to 9.16.1. I promise I've had it running for a couple of weeks, and it seems pretty stable. I haven't had any issues whatsoever. I did fail my first disk in 3 years of running the system, though. So that's a fun project I'm dealing with. As always, guys, my name is Nick Howell. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Make sure you go get into our Discord community. We would really appreciate it. I know you will really enjoy it as well. It's a great place to get some questions answered, join in the community side of it, show us your home lab, all that kind of good stuff. We want to hang out with you. And yeah, we'll be back next week. Oh, it's out there now, so I can kind of say something. For those of you still watching, you may have noticed another staged live stream for next Tuesday morning right here on the YouTube channel. That's all I'm going to say about it. I'll let you go see the description and infer what you want to infer out of it, but mark your calendars, 8 a.m. next Tuesday right here on YouTube. You won't want to miss it. I promise. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you got your notifications on. That way you know when we go live, you get a ping. For either for these on-air episodes or for any other things we might be doing. But until then, guys, take care. We'll see you guys next week. Everybody have a great week. Take care.